Welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we're reading the book titled Reincarnation and the Law of Karma, a study of the old New World doctrine of rebirth and spiritual cause and effect by William Walker Atkinson. The author is inviting us to travel to the land of India and explore the different sects and their concepts of reincarnation. He believes that India is the mother of reincarnation, the past and present, and he's going to highlight a little bit of the Aryan teachings, the history, and the belief among the Hindus, and pretty much the general fundamental Hindu philosophy as it applies to reincarnation. As I explore these esoteric and occult content, I am learning the evolution of various religions, some evolving from pagan foundations or from nature worship concepts, and this is not to confuse with a spiritual belief, but from that concept of the collective need to come together under a common belief. And it is interesting how history and mythology gets beautifully intertwined. And when we look at various mythologies, especially Greek and Hindu mythology, the similarities are so striking that one cannot help but wonder that maybe the stories came down from common ancestors and branched out into different versions and cultures. It's not hard to conceive one culture to borrow from the other. Commerce will take care of that. I mean, we could see it in almost any community in this modern world, as we can see how trading between nations, sooner or later, we see such influence in new foods or fashion being introduced. And why not beliefs? This trade in the ancient world through Aryan, Phoenician, Greeks, Eastern Mediterranean civilizations, trading especially in the famous purple dye, is historically documented by poets and historians. One example was the tale happening in the area of Levant, present-day Lebanon, where Cadmus and the other Tyrian brothers, they set out in search of their sister, Europa, who had been abducted by Zeus in the form of a white bull. And it helps to understand the terminology, as in the term Aryan, which was actually or originally used as an ethno-cultural designation by the Indo-Iranians, referring to themselves as noble or honorable to distinguish from others, and its connotation to mean the evolved over time. Unfortunately, over time, the term has often been misused and taken on to mean something else. These Indo-Iranians are known to be the authors of the oldest known religious text, known as the Vedas, which is what we are learning here through the discourse that William Walker Atkinson is sharing. And these Vedas were initially passed down orally, but later written down in Vedic Sanskrit between 1500 to 1200 BCE. Now, bringing back the Greek into this conversation to create a timeline, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which I have here on the playlist, are traditionally dated to around 8th or 9th century BCE. And creating more of a timeline, the Vedas would predate the teachings of Christianity, which is rooted in the life and teachings of Jesus, who is believed to have lived in the 1st century CE, Anno Domini, whichever one you prefer. And the Vedas would predate Christianity by approximately 2,000 to 2,500 years. Now, just for fun, since I'm throwing down a timeline, the Epic of Atrahasis, which is also here in the playlist, is an ancient Mesopotamian story of creation originating from the earlier Sumerian traditions, and it predates the Vedas, dating back to around 1700 BC. The Vedas, specifically the Rig Veda, are generally dated to between 1500 and 1000 BC. I find it fascinating looking at that domino effect and finding these breadcrumbs in these ancient texts and how things morph into existence. There is something beautiful about that. And I am grateful for every individual that has chosen to be a gatekeeper of truth. From those that wrote poetry, history, sang songs, created art and sculptures depicting the human experience, as well as to those who have dedicated their lives, whether archaeologists in bringing it back and preserving these things, to those that learn these ancient languages and translate it and pass it on to the next generation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hear me as a simple housewife, a mother, a former police officer, a former mayor, and now enjoying life and looking at these ancient resources. Thank you so much for doing that. And still, not everyone will have eyes to see and ears to hear. In this rich labyrinth of stories, songs, and myth, a narrative of humanity is shared. One speaks of the life as it is, others of the life as it is to come, or perhaps of the life as it was, or the life as it wishes to be. So I ask you, reincarnation or not? And with that, let's flip the page. Reincarnation and the Law of Karma by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 5. The Hindus. While reincarnation has been believed and taught in nearly every nation and among all races in former or present times, still we are justified in considering India as the natural mother of the doctrine, inasmuch as it has found an especially favorable spiritual and mental environment in that land and among its people. The date of its birth there being lost in the cloudiness of ancient history, but the tree of the teaching being still in full flower and still bearing an abundance of fruit. As the Hindus proudly claim, while the present dominant race was still in the savage, cave-dwelling, Stone Age stage of existence, and while even the ancient Jewish people were beginning to place the foundation stones of their religion, of which the present China religion is but an offshoot, the great Hindu religious teachers and philosophers had long since firmly established their philosophies and religions with the doctrine of reincarnation and its accompanying teachings, which had been accepted as truth by the great Aryan race in India. And throughout 40 centuries or more, this race has held steadfastly to the original doctrine, until now the West is looking again to it for light on the great problems of human life and existence. And now, in the 20th century, many careful thinkers consider that in the study and understanding of the great fundamental thoughts of the Vedas and Upanishads, the West will find the only possible antidote to the virus of materialism that is poisoning the veins of Western spiritual understanding. The idea of reincarnation is to be found in nearly all of the philosophies and religions of the race, at least in some period in their history, among all peoples and races. Yet, in India do we find the doctrine in the fullest flower, not only in the past, but in the present. From the earliest ages of the race in India, reincarnation in some of its various forms has been the accepted doctrine, and today it is accepted by the entire Hindu people, with their many divisions and subraces, with the exception of the Hindu Mohammedans. The teeming millions of India live and die in the full belief of reincarnation, and to them it is accepted without a question as the only rational doctrine concerning the past, present, and future of the soul. Nowhere on this planet is there to be found such an adherence to the idea of soul life, the thinking Hindu always regarding himself as a soul occupying a body, rather than a body having a soul, as so many of the Western people seem to regard themselves. And to the Hindus, the present life is truly regarded as but one step on the stairway of life, and not as the only material life preceding an eternity of spiritual existence. To the Hindu mind, eternity is here with us now, and we are in eternity as much this moment as we ever shall be, and the present life is but one of a number of fleeting moments in the eternal life. The early Hindus did not possess the complicated forms of religion now existing among them, with their various creeds, ceremonials, rituals, cults, schools, and denominations. On the contrary, their original form of religion was an advanced form of what some have called nature worship, but which was rather more than that which the Western mind usually means by the term. Their nature was rather a spirit of nature, or one life, of which all existing forms are but varying manifestations. Even in this early stage of their religious development, they held to a belief in reincarnation of the soul from one form to another, while to them everything was but a manifestation of one life. Still, the soul was a differentiated unit, emanated from the one life, and destined to work its way back to unity and oneness with the divine life through many and varied incarnations, until finally it would be again merged with the one. From this early beginning arose the many and varied forms of religious philosophy known to the India of today. But clinging to all these modern forms is to be found the fundamental basis idea of reincarnation and final absorption with the One. Brahmanism came first, starting from the simple and working to the complex, a great priesthood gradually arising and surrounding the original simple religious philosophy with ceremonial, ritual, and theological and metaphysical abstractions and speculation. Then arose Buddhism, which in a measure was a return to the primitive idea, but which in turn developed a new priesthood and religious organization. But the fundamental doctrine of reincarnation permeated them all, and may be regarded as the great common center of the Hindu religious thought and philosophy. The Hindu religious books are filled with references to the doctrine of reincarnation. The Laws of Manu, one of the oldest existing pieces of Sanskrit writing, contains many mentions of it, and the Upanishads and Vedas contain countless references to it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "Know thou, O Prince of Pandu, that there never was a time when I, nor thou, nor any of these princes of earth was not. Nor shall there ever come a time hereafter when any of us shall cease to be. As the soul, wearing this material body, experienceth the stages of infancy, youth, manhood, and old age, so shall it in due time pass on to another body, and in other incarnations shall it again live, and move and play its part. These bodies, which act as enveloping coverings for the souls occupying them, are but finite things, things of the moment, and not the real man at all. They perish as all finite things perish. Let them perish. He who in his ignorance thinketh, I slay, or I am slain, babbleth like an infant lacking knowledge. Of a truth none can slay, none can be slain. Take unto thy inner mind this truth, O Prince. Verily, the real man, the spirit of man, is neither born, nor doth it die. Unborn, undying, ancient, perpetual, and eternal, it hath endured, and will endure forever. The body may die, be slain, be destroyed completely, but he that hath occupied it remaineth unharmed. As a man throweth away his old garments, replacing them with new and brighter ones, even so the dweller of the body, having quitted its old mortal frame, entereth into others which are new and freshly prepared for it. Many have been my births and rebirths, O Prince, and many also have been thine own. But between us lies this difference. I am conscious of all my many lives, but thou lackest remembrance of thine." In the Mahabharata is said, "Even as when he casteth off an old garment, men clothe himself in new raiment, even so the soul, casting off the worn-out body, takes on a new body, avoids the fatal paths leading to hell, works for its salvation, and proceeds toward heaven." The Brihadaranyaka, one of the old Hindu writings, contains the following: "As the caterpillar, getting to the end of the straw, takes itself away after finding a resting place in advance, so the soul, leaving this body and finding another place in advance, takes himself off from his original abode. As the goldsmith, taking little by little of the gold, expands into a new form, So indeed, does this soul, leaving this body, make a new and happy abode for himself. But to attempt to quote passages relating to incarnation from the Hindu books would be akin to compiling a library of many volumes. The sacred writings of the East are filled with references to reincarnation, and if the latter were eliminated, it would be like the play of Hamlet, and Hamlet omitted. We cannot enter into a description of the various schools of Hindu religious thought and philosophy in this work, for to do so would be to expand this little volume in several of larger size, so extended is the subject. But underlying the many divisions and subdivisions of Hindu thought may be found the fundamental idea of an original emanation from, or manifestation of, one divine being. Power and energy into countless differentiated units, atoms or egos, which units embodying in matter are unconscious of the spiritual nature and take on a conscience corresponding with the form in which they are embodied. Then follows a series of embodiments or incarnations from lower to higher, in which occurs an evolution or unfoldment of the nature of the soul, in which it rises to higher and higher planes of being until finally, after aeons of time, it enters in union with the divine nirvana and para-nirvana, the state of eternal bliss. The great difference between the Hindu thought and the Grecian is that while the Greeks considered repeated life with joy as a means of greater and greater expression of life, the Hindus, on the contrary, regard life as but a period of travail and sorrow, the only light to be perceived being the expectation and hope of eventually emerging from the region of materiality and illusion, and regaining true existence in the spirit. The Hindus nearly all agree that this material life is occasioned by avidya, or ignorance on the part of the soul of its own real nature and being, whereby it fails to recognize that this material life is maya, or illusion. They hold that wisdom consists in the soul recognizing its real nature and perceiving the illusion of material life and things, and striving to liberate itself from the bondage of materiality and ignorance. The principal differences among the various Hindu schools of religion and philosophical thought arise from their differing views regarding the nature and constitution of the soul on the one hand, and the means of attaining liberation and freedom from material embodiment on the other. The doctrine of karma, of spiritual cause and effect, which we shall consider in another chapter, also runs along with all the varying Hindu conceptions, doctrines, and theories. Without considering the matter of differences of opinion between the various schools concerning the nature and constitution of the soul, we may say that all the schools practically agree that the constitution of man is a complex thing, comprising a number of sheaths, bodies, coverings, or elements, from the grosser to the more spiritual, the various sheaths being discarded as the soul advances on its way toward perfection. There are disputes between the various schools regarding terminology and the precise arrangement of these principles, but the following classification will answer for the purpose of giving a general idea of the Hindu views on the subject, subject always to the conflicting claims of the various schools. The classification is as follows, passing from lower to higher. 1. Physical or material body, or rupa. 2. Vitality of vital force, or prana jiva. 3. Astral body, etheric double, or linga sharira. 4. Animal soul, or kama rupa. 5. Human soul, or manas. 6. Spiritual soul, or buddhi. 7. Divine spirit, or atma. From the beginning, the tendency of the Hindu mind was in the direction of resolving the universe of forms, shapes, and change back into some one underlying principle from which all the phenomenal world emerged, some one indefinite energy from which all else emerged, emanated, or evolved. And the early Hindu mind busied itself actively with the solution of the problem of this one being manifesting a becoming into many, just as is the Western world of today actively engaged in solving many material problems. So was ancient India active in solving many spiritual problems, just as the modern West is straining every energy toward discovering the how. So was ancient India straining every effort to discovering the why. And from that struggle of the mind of India, there arose countless schools of religious and philosophical thought, many of which have passed away, but many of which persist today. The problem of the relationship of the human soul to the one being, and the secondary problem of the life, present and future, of the individual soul, is a most vital one to all thinking Hindus today, as in the 40 centuries or more of its philosophical history. To the Hindu mind, all material research is of minor importance, the important truth being to discover that which, when once known, all else is understood. But, as we have said, in spite of the numerous religions, schools, and phases of teaching among the Hindus, the one fundamental conception of reincarnation is never lost sight of, nor is it ever doubted in any of the forms of the philosophies or religions. Ignoring the subdivisions of Hindu philosophical thought, we may say that the Hindu philosophies may be divided into a few general classes, several of which we shall now hastily consider, that you may get a glimpse of the variety of Hindu speculative philosophy in its relation to the soul and its destiny. You will, of course, understand that we can do no more than mention the leading features of each class, as a careful consideration would require volumes for each particular school. We will first consider the philosophy of Kannada, generally known as the Vaisheshika teaching, which inclines towards an atomic theory, akin to that formulated by the old Greek philosopher Democritus. According to this teaching, the substance of the universe is composed of an infinite number of atoms, which are eternal and which were not created by God, but which are co-eternal with Him. These atoms, combining and forming shapes, forms, etc., are the basis of the material universe. It is held, however, that the power or energy whereby these atoms combine and thus form matter comes from God. This teaching holds that God is a personal being, possessing omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. It is also held that there are two substances or principles higher than the material energies or substance, namely manas or mind and atman or spirit manas or mind is held to be something like a mind stuff from which all individual minds are built up, and which mind stuff is held to be eternal. Atman or spirit is held to be an eternal principle from which the selves or souls are differentiated. The Atman or spirit or self is regarded as much higher than mind, which is its tool and instrument of expression. This philosophy teaches that through progression, by reincarnation, the soul advances from lower to higher states on its road to freedom and perfection. Another great school of Hindu philosophy is the philosophy of Kapila, generally known as the Sankhya system. This teaching opposes the atomic theory of the Vaisheshika system and holds that the atoms are not indestructible nor eternal, but may be resolved back into a primal substance called Prakriti. Prakriti is held to be an universal, eternal energy or ethereal substance, something similar to certain Western scientific conceptions of a universal ether. from this eternal, universal energy, Kapila held that all the universe had been evolved, all material forms or manifestations of energy being but manifestations of Prakriti. But the Sakya system is not materialistic, as might be supposed at first glance, for side by side with Prakriti it offers the principle of Purusha, or soul, or spirit, of which all individual souls are atomic units. The principle of Purusha being an unity of units, and not an undivided one. The Purusha, that is, its units or individual souls, is regarded as eternal and immortal. Prakriti is devoid of mind, but is possessed of active vital energy, and is capable of producing forms and material manifestations by reason of its inherent energy and laws, and thus produces what the Hindus call Maya, or material illusion, which they hold to be devoid of reality, inasmuch as the forms are constantly changing and have no permanence. And this philosophy holds that Prakriti, by means of the glamour of its manifestations of Maya, entices the individual souls, or Purushas, which when once in the center of attraction of the Maya, are drawn into the vortex of material existence, losing a knowledge of the real nature. But the souls never lose entirely the glimmer of the light of the spirit, and consequently soon begin to feel that they have made a mistake, and consequently begin to strive to escape the bondage of Prakriti and its Maya. But such escape is possible only through a gradual rising up from the depths of Maya, step by step, cycle by cycle, by a series of purification and cleansing of themselves, just as a fly cleanses itself of the sticky substance into which it has fallen. This escape is accomplished by spiritual unfoldment or evolution, by means of reincarnation. This evolution not being a growth, but rather an unfoldment or unwrapping of the soul from its confining sheaths, one by one. Another great school of Hindu philosophy is the philosophy of Patanjali, generally known as the Yoga philosophy, but which differs from the Yogi philosophy of the West, which is eclectic in nature. The Yoga philosophy of Patanjali bears some resemblance to the Sakya school of Kapila, inasmuch as it recognizes the teachings regarding Prakriti, from which universal energy, the material universe, has been evolved, and inasmuch as it also recognizes the countless individual Purushas, or souls, which are eternal and immortal, and which are entrapped in the Maya of Prakriti. But it then takes a position widely divergent from the Sakya school, inasmuch as Patanjali's Yoga school holds that there also exists a supreme Purusha, spirit, soul, or God, who is without form, infinite, eternal, and above all, attributes and qualities common to man. In this respect, Patanjali differs from Kapila and inclines rather toward agreement with Kannada, of the first mentioned school of the Vaisheshika system. All three philosophers, however, seem to generally agree in the main upon the mind principle, which they hold to be beneath soul or spirit, and to be in the nature of mind stuff, which is of a semi-material nature. Kapila and Patanjali even going so far as to hold that it is a manifestation of Prakriti, or of the universal energy, rather than a distinct principle. They hold that the Purusha, or spirit, not the mind, is the real self, and the source of consciousness and the real intelligence. The practical teachings of the school of Patanjali is a system by which the Purusha may escape from and overcome the Prakriti, and thus gain emancipation, freedom, and a return to its natural and original purity and power. This school, of course, teaches reincarnation and progression through rebirth in accordance with the principle mentioned above. Another great school of Hindu philosophy is that known as the Vedanta philosophy, which many consider the most advanced of all the Hindu systems and which is rapidly growing in popularity among the educated Hindus and also among many very intelligent students of philosophical thought in the Western world. Its followers claim that the Vedanta philosophy has reached the very highest point of philosophical thought, speculation, and analysis possible to the human mind of today, and many Western students have claimed that it contains the highest conceptions found in any and all of the great world philosophies. Be this as it may, it certainly contains much that is the most subtle, refined, and keen in the field of philosophical speculative thought of the world. And while, as some claim, it may lack the appeal to the religious emotions that some other forms of thought possess, still it proves very attractive to those in whom intellectual development and effort have superseded the emotional side of philosophy or religion. The Vedanta system holds that the ultimate reality or actual being of the universe, the one absolute energy or substance from which all the universe proceeds, is that which may be called the Absolute, which is eternal, infinite, indivisible, beyond attributes and qualities, and which is the source of intelligence. The Absolute is held to be one, not many, unique and alone. It is identical with the Sanskrit Brahman and is held to be that which has been called the unknowable, the Father, the Oversoul, the thing in itself. In short, it is that which men mean and have always meant when they wished to express the absolute reality. The Vedantists hold that this absolute Brahman is the essence of Sat, or absolute existence, Chit, or absolute intelligence, and Ananda, or absolute bliss. Without attempting to enter into an analysis or close exposition of the Vedanta philosophy, or so far as concerns the soul and its destiny, we may say that it holds that there do not exist the countless eternal immortal souls or purushas of the Sankhya philosophy, but instead that the individual souls are but the countless images or reflections of the absolute being, or Brahman, and have their existence only by reason of the real existence of the one only being. Consequently, the spirit within the soul of man, and which is the soul of his soul, is divine. The Vedantists admit the existence of a Logos, or Ishwara, the Lord of the universe, who is, however, but a manifestation of Brahman, a general soul, as it were, and who presides over the evolution of the universes from the Prakriti, and who plays the part of the demiurge of the old Grecian and Gnostic philosophies. The Vedantists admit the existence relative of Prakriti, of universal energy, but hold that it is not eternal or real in itself, but is practically identical with Maya, and may be regarded as a form of the creative energy of the Absolute, Brahman. This Maya, which, while strictly speaking, is illusion inasmuch as it has no real existence or eternal quality, is the source of time, space, and causation, and of the phenomenal universe with its countless forms, shapes, and appearances. The Vedantists teach that the evolution of the soul is accomplished by its escaping the folds of Maya, or materiality, one by means of rebirths, until it manifests more and more of its divine nature. And thus it goes on, from higher to still higher, until at last it enters into the divine being and attains union with God and is one with the Father. Another great Hindu philosophy is the philosophy of Gautama, the Buddha, which is generally known as the Buddhistic philosophy or as Buddhism. It is difficult to give a clear idea of Buddhism in a concise form, for there are so many schools, sects, and divisions among this general school of philosophy, differing upon the minor points and details of doctrine, that it requires a lengthy consideration in order to clear away the disputed points. Speaking generally, however, it may be said that the Buddhists start with the idea or conception of an unknowable reality, back of and under all forms and activity of the phenomenal universe. Buddha refused to discuss the nature of this reality, practically holding it to be unknowable, and in the nature of an absolute nothing rather than an absolute something in the sense of thingness as we understand the term. And that is to say, it is a no thing rather than a thing. Consequently, it is beyond thought, understanding, or even imagination. All that can be said is that it is. Buddha refused to discuss or teach of the manner in which this unknowable came to manifest upon the relative plane, for he held that man's proper study was of the world of things and how to escape therefrom. In a vague way, however, Buddhism holds that in some way this unknowable, or a part thereof, becomes entangled in Maya or illusion through avidya or ignorance. Law, necessity, or perhaps something in the nature of a mistake. And arising from this mistaken activity, all the pain and sorrow of the universe arises. For the Buddhist holds that the universe is a world of woe, from which the soul is trying to escape. Buddhism holds that the soul reincarnates often because of its desires and attractions, which, if nursed and encouraged, will lead it into lives without number. Consequently, to the Buddhist, wisdom consists in acquiring a knowledge of the true state of affairs, just mentioned, and then upon that knowledge building up a new life in which desire and attraction for the material world shall be eliminated, to the end that the soul, having killed out desire for material things, having cut off the dead branch of illusion, is enabled to escape from karma and eventually be released from rebirth, thence passing back into the great ocean of the unknowable, or nirvana, and ceasing to be, so far as the phenomenal world is concerned, although of course it will exist in the unknowable, which is eternal. Many Western readers imagine the Buddhistic nirvana to be an utter annihilation of existence and being, but the Hindu mind is far more subtle and sees a vast difference between utter annihilation on the one hand and extinction of personality on the other. That which appears nothingness to the Western mind is seen as nothingness to the Oriental conception and is considered more of a resumption of an original real existence rather than an ending thereof. There is a great difference between the two great schools of Buddhism, the northern and southern respectively, regarding the nature of the soul. The northern school considers the soul as an entity differentiated from the unknowable in some mysterious way not explained by Buddha, and yet different from the individual Purusha of the Sankhya school, before mentioned. On the contrary, the southern school does not regard the soul as a differentiated or distinct entity, but rather as a center of phenomenal activity saturated or charged with the results of its deeds, and that therefore the karma, or the essence of deeds, may be considered as the soul itself, rather than as something pertaining to it. The northern school holds that the soul, accompanied by its karma, reincarnates along the same lines as those taught by all the other Hindu schools of reincarnation and karma. But the southern school, on the contrary, holds that it is not the soul entity that reincarnates, for there is no such entity, but that instead it is the karma, or essence of deeds, that reincarnates from life to life, according to its attractions, desires, and merits or demerits. In the last mentioned view of the case, the rebirth is compared to the lighting of the one lamp from the flame of another, rather than in the transferring of the oil from one lamp to another. But really, these distinctions are quite metaphysical, and when refined by analysis become hair-splitting. It is said that the two schools of Buddhism are growing nearer together and their differences reconciled. The Orthodox Hindus claim that Buddhism is on the decline in India, being largely supplanted by the various forms of Vedanta. On the other hand, Buddhism has spread to China, Japan, and other countries where it has taken on new forms and has grown into a religion of ritualism, creeds, and ceremonialism, with an accompanying loss of that original philosophy and a corresponding increase of detail of teaching, doctrine, and disciple, and general churchiness, including a belief in several thousand different kind of hells. But even in the degenerated forms, Buddhism still holds to reincarnation as a fundamental doctrine. In this consideration of the philosophies of India, we do not consider it necessary to go into an explanation of the various forms of religions or church divisions among the Hindus. In India, religion is an important matter, and there seems to be some form of religion adapted to each one of the country's teeming millions. From the grossest form of religious superstition and crudest form of ceremony and worship up to the most refined idealism and beautiful symbolisms runs the gamut of the Hindu religions. Many people are unable to conceive of an abstract ideal universal being, such as the Brahman of the Hindu philosophy, and consequently that being has been personified as an anthropomorphic deity, and human attributes bestowed upon him to suit the popular fancy. In India, as in all other countries, the priesthood have given the people that which they asked for, and the result is that many forms of churchly ceremonialism and forms of worship maintain which are abhorrent and repulsive to Western ideas. But we of the West are not entirely free from this fault, as one may see if he examines some of the religious conceptions and ceremonies common among ignorant people in remote parts of our land. Certain conceptions of an anthropomorphic deity held by some of the more ignorant people of the Western world are but little advanced beyond the idea of the devil, and the belief in a horned, cloven-hooved, spike-tailed, red-colored, satyr-like, leering devil with his hell of eternal fire and brimstone is not so uncommon as many imagine. It has not been so long since we were taught that one of the chief pleasures of God and his angels and the saved souls will be the witnessing of the tortures of the damned in hell from the walls of heaven. And the ceremonies of an old-time Southern Negro camp meeting were not specially elevating or ideal. Among the various forms of the religions of India, we find some of the before-mentioned forms of philosophy believed and taught among the educated people, often an eclectic policy of choosing and selecting being observed, a most liberal policy being observed, the liberty of choice and selection being freely accorded. But there is always the belief in reincarnation and karma, no matter what the form of worship or the name of the religion. There are two things that the Hindu mind always accepts as fundamental truth, needing no proof, axiomic in fact. And these two are, 1, the belief in a soul that survives the death of the body, the Hindu mind seeming unable to differentiate between the consciousness of I am and I always have been and always shall be. The knowledge of the present existence being accepted as proof of past and future existence. And 2, the doctrine of reincarnation and karma, which are accepted as fundamental and axiomic truths beyond the need of proof and beyond doubt. As a writer has said, the idea of reincarnation has become so firmly fixed and rooted in the Hindu mind as a part of belief that it amounts to the dignity and force of a moral conviction. No matter what may be the theories regarding the nature of the universe, the character of the soul, or the conception concerning deity or the supreme being, you will always find the differing sects, schools, and individuals accepting reincarnation and karma as they accept the fact that they themselves are existent, or that twice one makes two. Hindu philosophy cannot be divorced from reincarnation. To the Hindu, the only escape from the doctrine of reincarnation seems to be along the road of the materialism of the West. From the above statement, we may accept the Hindu Mohammedans and the native Hindu Christians, partially, although carefully observers say that even these do not escape entirely the current belief of their country and secretly entertain a mental reservation in their heterodox creeds. So you see, we are justified in considering India as the motherland of reincarnation at the present time. End of chapter. Chapter 6. The Modern West. In the modern thought of the Western world, we find reincarnation attracting much attention. The Western philosophies for the past 100 years have been approaching the subject with a new degree of attention and consideration, and during the past 20 years, there has been a marvelous awakening of Western public interest in the doctrine. At the present time, the American and European magazines contain poems and stories based upon reincarnation, and many novels have been written around it, and plays even have been based on the general doctrine and have received a marked attention on the part of the public. The idea seems to have caught the public fancy, and the people are eager to know more of it. This present revival of attention has been brought about largely by the renewed interest on the part of the Western world toward the general subject of occultism, mysticism, comparative religion, Oriental philosophy, etc., in their many phases and forms. The World's Parliament of Religions, held at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, did much to attract the attention of the American public to the subject of the Oriental philosophies in which reincarnation plays such a prominent part. But perhaps the prime factor in this reawakened Western interest in the subject is the work and teachings of the Theosophical Society, founded by Madame Blavatsky some 30 years ago, and which has since been continued by her followers and several successors. But whatever may be the cause, the idea of reincarnation seems destined to play an important part in the religious and philosophical thought of the West for some time to come. Signs of it appear on every side. The subject cannot be ignored by the modern student of religion and philosophy. Whether accepted or not, it must be recognized and examined. But the forms of the doctrine or theory regarding reincarnation vary almost as much in the modern West as in the various Eastern countries at present and in the past. We find all phases of the subject attracting attention and drawing followers to its support. Here we find the influence of the Hindu thought, principally through the medium or channel of theosophy or of the yogi philosophy, and there we find the influence of the Grecian or Egyptian philosophical conceptions manifesting principally through the medium of a number of occult orders and organizations whose work is performed quietly and with little recognition on the part of the general public, the policy being to attract the elect few rather than the curious crowd. And again, we find quite a number of persons in America and Europe believing in reincarnation because they are attracted by the philosophy of the Neoplatonists or the Gnostics of the early Christian church, and favoring reincarnation as a proper part of the Christian religion, and who, while remaining in the bosom of the church, interpret the teachings by the light of the doctrine of rebirth, as did many of the early Christians, as we have seen. The theosophical conception and interpretation appeals to a great number of the Western reincarnationists by reason of its wide circulation and dissemination, as well as by the fact that it has formulated a detailed theory and doctrine, and besides claims the benefit of authoritative instruction on the doctrine from adepts and masters who have passed to a higher plane of existence. We think it proper to give in some little detail an account of the general teachings of theosophy on this point, the reader being referred to the general theosophical literature for more extended information regarding this special teaching. Theosophy teaches that the human soul is a composite entity consisting of several principles, sheaths of vehicles, similar to those mentioned by us in our account of Hindu reincarnation. The theosophical books state these principles as follows. 1. The body or rupa. 2. Vitality or prana jiva. 3. Astral body or linga sharira. 4. Animal soul or kama rupa. 5. Human soul, manas. 6. Spiritual soul, or buddhi. And 7. Spirit, or atma. Of these 7 principles, the last are higher. 3, namely the atma, buddhi, and manas, compose the higher trinity of the soul, the part of man which persists, while the lower 4 principles, namely rupa, pranajiva, linga sharira, and kama rupa, respectively, are the lower principles which perish after the passing out of the higher principles at death. At death, the higher principles, or triad, lives on, while the lower principles of quaternary dissolve and separate from each other and finally disintegrate, along the lines of a process resembling chemical action. Theosophy teaches that there is a great stream of egos, or monads, which originally emanated from a source of being, and which are pursuing a spiral journey around a chain of 7 globes, including the Earth, called the planetary chain. The life wave of monads reaches globe A and goes through a series of evolutionary life on it, and then passes on to globe B, and so on until globe G is reached, when after a continued life, there the life wave returns to globe A. But not in a circle, but rather in a spiral, that is, a higher plane of activity, and the round begins once more. There are 7 races to be lived through on each globe, many incarnations in each race having 7 sub-races, and each sub-race having 7 branches. The progress of the life wave is illustrated by the symbol of a 7-coil spiral, sweeping with a wider curve at each coil. Each coil, however, being divided into a minor 7-coil spiral, and so on. It is taught that the human soul is now on its 4th great round visit to the Earth, and it is on about the middle of the 5th race of that round. The total number of incarnations necessary for each round is quite large, and the teaching is that none can escape them, except by special merit and development. Between each incarnation, there is a period of rest in the heaven world, or devashan, where the soul reaps the experiences of the past life and prepares for the next step. The period of rest varies with the degree of attainment gained by the soul. The higher the degree, the longer the rest. The average time between incarnations is estimated at about 1,500 years. Devashan is thus a kind of temporary heaven, from whence the soul must again pass in time for a rebirth, according to its merits or demerits. Thus, accordingly, each soul has lived in a variety of bodies, even during the present round, having successively incarnated as a savage, a barbarian, a semi-civilized man, a native of India, Egypt, Chaldea, Rome, Greece, and many other lands in different ages, filling all kinds of positions and places in life, tasting of poverty and riches, of pleasure and pain, all ever leading toward higher things. The doctrine enunciated by Theosophy is complicated and intricate, and we can do no more than to barely mention the same at this place. Another Western form of the Oriental teachings, known as the Yogi philosophy, numbers quite a large number of earnest students in this country and in Europe, and has a large circle of influence, although it has never crystallized into an organization, the work being done quietly and the teachings spread by the sale of popular books on the subject issued at normal prices. It is based on the inner teachings of the Hindu philosophy and is eclectic in nature, deriving its inspiration from the several great teachers, philosophies, and schools, rather than implicitly following any one of them. Briefly stated, this Western school of yogi philosophy teaches that the universe is an emanation from, or mental creation of, the Absolute, whose creative will flows out in an outpouring of mental energy, descending from a condition above mind, downward through mind, physical energy, and matter, in a grand involution or infolding of the divine energy into material forms and states. This evolution is followed by an evolution or unfoldment, the material forms advancing in the scale of evolution, accompanied by corresponding spiritual evolution or unfoldment of the individual centers or units of being, created or emanated as above stated. The course of evolution, or rather, that phase of it with which the present human race on Earth is concerned, has now reached a point about midway in the scale of spiritual evolution, and the future will lead the race on and on to higher and still higher planes and states of being, on this earth and on other spheres, until it reaches a point incomprehensible to the mind of man today. And then still on and on, until finally the souls will pass into the plane of the Absolute, there to exist in a state of impossible of present comprehension, and transcending not only the understanding but also the imagination of the mind of man as we know him. The yogi philosophy teaches that the soul will reincarnate on earth until it is fitted to pass on to higher planes of being, and that many people are now entering into a stage which will terminate the unconscious reincarnation, and which enables them to incarnate consciously in the future without loss of memory. It teaches that instead of retributive karma, there is a law of spiritual cause and effect, operating largely along the lines of desire and what has been called the law of attraction, by which like attracts like in persons, environments, conditions, etc. As we have stated, the yogi philosophy follows closely the lines of certain phases of the Hindu philosophies from which it is derived, it being, however, rather an eclectic system rather than an exact reproduction of that branch of philosophy favored by certain schools of Hindus and known by a similar name, as mentioned in our chapter on the Hindus. That is to say, instead of accepting the teachings of any particular Hindu school in their entirety, the Western school of the yogi philosophy has adopted the policy of eclecticism, that is, a system following the policy of selection, choosing from several sources of systems, rather than a blind following of some particular school, cult, or teacher. The yogi philosophy teaches that man is a sevenfold entity consisting of the following principles or divisions. 1. The physical body. 2. The astral body. 3. Prana, or vital force. 4. The instinctive mind. 5. The intellect. 6. The spiritual mind. 7. Spirit. Of these, the first 4 principles belong to the lower part of the being, while the latter 3 are the higher principles which persist and reincarnate. Man, however, is gradually evolving on the plane of the spiritual mind and will in time pass beyond the plane of intellect, which he will then class along with instinct as a lower form of mentality. He then, using his intuition habitually and ordinarily, just as the intelligent man now uses his intellect, and the ignorant man his instinct intellect, and the animal its instinct alone, in many points, the yogi philosophy resembles the Vedanta, and in others it agrees with Theosophy, although it departs from the latter in some of the details of doctrine regarding the process of reincarnation, and particularly in its conception of the meaning and operation of the law of karma. There are many persons in the West who hold firmly to reincarnation, to whom the Hindu conceptions, even in the Western form of their presentation, do not appeal, and who naturally incline toward the Greek conception and form of the doctrine. A large number of these people are generally classed among the spiritualists, although strictly speaking they do not fit into that classification, for they hold that the so-called spirit world is not a place of permanent abode, but rather a resting place between incarnations. And these people prefer the name spiritists, for they hold that man is essentially a spiritual being, that the spirit is the real man, and that what which we call man is but a temporary stage in the development and evolution of this individual spirit. The spiritists hold that the individual spirit emanated from the great spirit of the universe, called by one name or another, at some distant period in the past, and has risen to its present state of man through and by a series of repeated incarnations, first in the form of the lowly forms of life, and then through the higher forms of animal life, until now it has reached the stage of human life, from whence it will pass on and on to higher and still higher planes, to forms and states as much higher than the human state than man is above the earthworm. The Spiritists hold that man will reincarnate in earthly human bodies only until the spirit learns its lessons and develops sufficiently to pass on to the next plane higher. They hold that the planets and the countless fixed stars or suns are but stages of abode for the evolving spirit, and that beyond the universe as we know it there are millions of others. In fact, that the number of universes is infinite. The keynote of this doctrine may be stated as eternal progression toward the divine spirit. The spirits do not insist upon any particular theory regarding the constitution of the soul. Some of them speak merely of soul and body, while others hold to the sevenfold being. The general idea being that this is unimportant, as the essential spirit is after all the real self, and it matters little about the number or names of its temporary garments or vehicles of expression. Still another class of reincarnationists in the Western world incline rather more toward the Grecian and Egyptian forms of the doctrine than the Hindu. The ideas of the Neoplatonists, which had such a powerful effect upon the early Christian church, or rather among the elect few among the early fathers of the church, seeming to have sprung into renewed activity among this class. And these people, as we have said in the beginning of this chapter, are rather inclined to group themselves into small organizations or secret orders, rather than to form popular cults. They follow the examples of the ancients in this respect, preferring the few elect to the curious general public who merely wish to taste or nibble at the truth. Many of these organizations are not known to the public, as they studiously avoid publicity or advertisement and trust to the law of attraction to bring their own to them and them to their own. The teachings of this class vary in interpretation, and as many of them maintain secrecy by pledges or oaths, it is not possible to give their teachings in detail. But generally speaking, they base their doctrine on the general principle that man's present condition is due to the descent of spirit in the nature of the fall of man, occurring sometime in the far distant past. They hold that man was originally spirit pure and free, from which blissful state he was enticed by the glamour of material life, and he accordingly fell from his higher state lower and lower until he was sunken deep into the mire of matter. From this lowly state, he then began to work up, or evolve, having in the dim recesses of his soul a glimmer of remembrance of his former state, which dim light is constantly urging him on and on toward this former estate, in spite of his frequent stumbling into the mire in his attempts to rise above it. This teaching holds to a theory and doctrine very similar to that of the Spiritists just mentioned, except that while the latter, in common with the majority of reincarnationists, hold that the evolution of the soul is in the direction of advancement and greater expression, similar to the growth of a child, these secret order people hold forcibly and earnestly to the idea that the evolution is merely a returning of the prodigal to his father mansion. The parable of the prodigal son and that of the expulsion from Eden being held as veiled allegories of their teaching. In the above view, the present state of existence, this earthly life, is one of a series of hells in the great hell of matter from which man is creeping up slowly but surely. According to this idea, the earth is but midway in the scale, there being depths of the materiality almost impossible of belief, and on the other hand, heights of heavenly bliss equally incapable of understanding. This is about all that we could say regarding this form of the doctrine, without violating certain confidences that have been reposed in us. We fear that we have said too much as it is, But inasmuch as one would have to be able to read between the lines to understand fully, we trust that those who have favored us with these confidences will pardon us. There is still another class of believers in reincarnation, of which even the general public is not fully aware, for this class does not have much to say regarding its beliefs. I allude to those in the ranks of the Orthodox Christian Church, who have outgrown the ordinary doctrines and who, while adhering firmly to the fundamental Christian doctrines and while clinging closely to the teachings of Jesus the Christ, still find in the idea of rebirth a doctrine that appeals to their soul and minds as closer to their highest conceptions of immortality than the ordinary teachings of the resurrection of the body or the vague doctrines that are taking its place. These Christian reincarnationists find nothing in the doctrine of reincarnation antagonistic to their faith, and nothing in their faith antagonistic to the doctrine of reincarnation. They do not use the term reincarnation usually, but prefer the term rebirth, as more closely expressing their thought. Besides which, the former term has a suggestion of pagan and heathen origin which is distasteful to them. These people are inclined toward rebirth for the reason that it gives the soul another chance to redeem itself, other chances to perfect itself to enter the heavenly realms. They do not hold to an idea of endless reincarnation or even of continued earthly incarnation for all, their idea being that the soul that is prepared to enter heaven passes on there at once, having learned enough and earned enough merit in the few lives it has lived on earth, while the unprepared, undeveloped, and unfit are bound to come back and back again until they have attained perfection sufficient to enable them to advance to the heaven world. A large number of the Christian reincarnationists, if I may call them by that name, hold that heaven is a place or state of eternal progression, rather than a fixed state or place, that there is no standing still in heaven or earth, that in my Father's house are many mansions. To the majority, this idea of progression in the higher planes seems to be a natural accompaniment to the spiritual progression that leads to the higher planes or heaven. At any rate, the two ideas seem always to have run together in the human mind when the general subject has been under consideration, whether in past time or present, whether among Christians or pagans and heathen. There seems to be an intuitive recognition of the connection of the two ideas. And on the other hand, there seems to be a close connection between the several views of special creation of the soul before both the single earth life and the eternity of reward or punishment in a state or place lacking progression or change. Human thought on the subject seems to divide it itself into two distinct and opposing groups. There are quite a number of Christian preachers and members of Orthodox churches who are taking an earnest interest in this doctrine of rebirth and eternal progression here and hereafter. It is being considered by many whose church associates do not suspect them of being other than strictly orthodox in their views. Someday there will be a breaking out of this idea in the churches when the believers in the doctrine grow in numbers and influence. It will not surprise careful observers to see the church once more accepting the doctrine of rebirth and reinstating the doctrine of pre-existence, returning to two of its original truths, long since discarded by order of the councils. Professor Bowen has said, "It seems to me that a firm and well-grounded faith in the doctrine of Christian metempsychosis might help to regenerate the world, for it would be a faith not hedged round with many of the difficulties and objections which beset other forms of doctrine, and it offers distinct and pungent motives for trying to lead a more Christian life, and for loving and helping our brothermen." And as James Freeman Clarke has said, it would be curious if we would find science and philosophy taking up again the old theory of metempsychosis, remodeling it to suit our present modes of religious and scientific thought, and launching it again on the wide ocean of human belief. But stranger things have happened in the history of human opinion. So as we have said, there is a great variety of shades of belief in the Western world regarding reincarnation today, and the student will have no difficulty in finding just the shade of opinion best suited to his taste, temperament, and training or experience. Vary as they do in detail and theory, there is still the same fundamental and basic truth of the one source, the one life, and reincarnation, reaching ever toward perfection and divinity. It seems impossible to disguise the doctrine so as to change its basic qualities. It will always show its original shape. And so it is with the varying opinions of the Western thought regarding it, the various cults advocating some form of its doctrine. The original doctrine may be learned and understood in spite of the fanciful dressings bestowed upon it. The truth is one. Men call it by many names. It may be of interest to Western readers to mention that some of the teachers of occultism and reincarnation hold that the present revival of interest in the subject in the Western world is due to the fact that in Europe and America, more particularly the latter, there is occurring a reincarnating of the souls of many persons who lived from 1500 to 2000 years ago and who were then believers in the doctrine. According to this view, those who are now attracted toward the Hindu forms of the doctrine formerly lived as natives of India. Those who favor the Grecian idea lived in ancient Greece. Others favored the Egyptian idea, from similar reasons. While the revival of Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, and general mysticism among the present-day Christians is accounted for by the fact that the early Christians are now reincarnating in the Western world, having been reborn as Christians according to the law of karmic attraction. In this manner, the advocates of the doctrine offer the present revival as another proof of their teachings. End of chapter. Make sure to visit my playlist for the next chapter. Hit like, share, and subscribe.